Thank you very much, Catherine, for that very nice introduction, and good afternoon, everybody. It's a particular pleasure for me to be here sharing my opinions on Lisbon almost 1 year on with such a well-informed audience. So I thought rather than make a formal speech, I would try to comment a little bit on what I see as the trends behind the events, not so much to describe what's happening as to interpret it. And I'm going to take this topic from a number of different points of view. First of all, and obviously, to talk about what's happening on the economic side, more from the point of view of what I call political economy, but to talk about the politics of the economic developments. Then to say a little bit about the institutional developments since the Lisbon Treaty entered into force. I think an audience like this is interested in that, and I'll touch on it. To say one or two words about the international aspects, given the importance of globalisation and given Europe in the world. And then to finish with just a few words on issues that will be coming up in the next few months that Ireland will certainly want to focus on, and perhaps a body like the Institute would want to focus on. And I apologise in advance to those of you who've already heard me on some of these topics earlier on this morning, but I'll try not to exactly repeat myself again. So first of all, on lessons from the crisis and why does Europe need to change its system of economic governance? I think that the crisis has underlined to all of us that you can't really have a currency union without having much closer economic policy coordination than we have had up to date. You cannot leave countries to sink or swim by themselves, because any country, no matter what its size, can drag the whole of the euro area down, can drag the whole of the European Union down. So the idea that non-interference is the right way to proceed, I think, has died a death in the crisis. I think, especially in the Eurozone, but even beyond the euro area, the member states have realised that they and we need to pay a lot more attention to what's happening in the economy of each member state and to intervene earlier and to issue warnings earlier. So we're trying now to distill those lessons into legislation and into the behavioural code for the future. So what it will amount to is much tighter rules of behaviour, particularly for those who are in the euro area, earlier and more serious monitoring by the Commission, but not only by the Commission. I think also the process of peer review of all the other member states, of each member state, will be much more intense in the future. And whatever is exactly the balance found between Council and Parliament in the coming months on this legislation, I think there's no doubt whatsoever that it will be a major step forward in terms of the economic governance of the euro and of the European Union. It's a commonplace nowadays to say you shouldn't waste a good crisis, and I think it is the fright of the crisis and the seriousness of the problems that we have avoided has underscored the need for change and made it politically possible. Of course, the arsenal of instruments that we have for dealing with economic difficulties is not yet complete, because there is very widespread agreement that we need a permanent crisis mechanism to be an instrument of last resort. It's been decided that we need to have it because the temporary mechanism we have at the moment runs out in 2013. And it was also decided by the heads of state and government at the European Council last week that we will have a treaty change to make it possible, in particular for Germany to participate in a permanent crisis mechanism in the future. So there will be a lot of work going on this in the next weeks in order to enable decisions to be taken by the European Council in December. I think whatever treaty change emerges will be very limited. That is the political wish of the European Council. It will not involve any transfer of powers to the European Union level, very important. And given that the determination is to have something very limited and which does not involve a transfer of power, it will obviously be for Ireland to decide whether a referendum is necessary or not. But I think the intent is to do something that can be done under the simplified procedure of the treaty, and that would not normally require a referendum. Let me put it in those terms. I think even if the Union emerges much better equipped from this crisis to face the economic policies of the future, there are obviously still quite a number of more political economy questions that people are asking. One of them is, will it be equal treatment for everybody? In other words, will the biggest member states submit to the same discipline as they would want to decide for the whole of the Union? Time will tell. I believe that this time it will be different. And one of the reasons I believe that this time it will be different is that, for example, Germany has a legal commitment to have a balanced budget by 2015. So I think you see some of the bigger member states organising themselves to domestically impose even more strict discipline on themselves than will be agreed at EU level. There is also the question, and I think we are beginning to see it here in the media debate in Ireland, as to whether all of this is not too intrusive, and whether the Commission role will be seen as helpful or as intrusive, particularly once the economy begins to improve. My own view is that the Commission has a responsibility to safeguard the euro area and to do the monitoring in the depth and intensity that is necessary to enable it to advise the Council when we think countries are getting into trouble, and also to work in very close partnership with each member state to try and head off trouble at the earliest sign of an emergence of difficulties. So I think the Commission will be much more involved in the domestic policy making of all member states in the future, particularly in the euro area. And I think that we will want that to be understood as a sharing of expertise, as something that is designed to be helpful and designed to be preventive of problems rather than intrusive. So those are the few general remarks I wanted to make about more the political economy of the economic governance. Moving on now to the effect of the institutional changes that came from the Lisbon Treaty. Less than a year is a short time, but I think we can already see some clear trends. We have had a lot of meetings of the European Council since the beginning of the year, and that has given us the opportunity to see the effect of having a permanent president of the European Council. And I think that certainly from the Commission's point of view, we have a very positive feeling about this first year of experience. I think President Van Rompuy has shown that he was absolutely the best choice for the job. His deep economic knowledge and his consensus approach and his ability to find compromises has been extremely important, I think, in terms of guiding the member states through the crisis and finding workable solutions. He and President Barroso have a very active working partnership. They meet every week to go through the agenda to see how they can work together. So I think on an institutional level, that is working very well. But of course, we also have to understand that we have different institutions. And I think that the continuity represented by a permanent president of the Council is very important, instead of the varying priorities of every 6-monthly rotating presidency. But there is a bit of a design flaw, I would say, in that the treaty doesn't design an obvious link between the permanent president of the European Council and the rotating presidency. And so we need to find ways to make that work more fluently in the future. I was very interested to see recently Chancellor Merkel made a speech in Bruges where she set out a new definition of what she's now calling the union method, and somehow in contrast to the community method. And describing the fact that intergovernmental responses can also be part of the union method, even if in Brussels the tendency is to describe them as not being part of the community method. So I think it's a very interesting speech for people who are interested in the institutional developments of the union, and certainly worth looking at to see that there are different views of how the union should be organised in the future now that there is a permanent president of the new institution of the European Council. Another innovation in Lisbon was the putting together of different roles under the one person of the High Representative. And I think it's been a very tough first year for the Union's first High Representative, because I think there has been so much internal discussion and negotiation that there has been much less focus on foreign policy than we would normally wish to see. And I think there is a feeling internationally that Europe has been a bit absent on the foreign policy front for this last year because we are getting our internal act together. I have said in other circles that I think the recent negative UN vote on a procedural motion sponsored by the EU was a very big wake-up call for the European Union. The countries who voted against the measure have since all come round to say, well, it was only procedural and they didn't really mean it, and they do think we are their best friends, etc., etc. But nonetheless, the fact that they felt that the European Union was equivalent to CARIFORM or other regional groupings, and that they could lightly vote no on a procedural motion that meant a lot to the EU, shows that we have a long way to go as a union to be understood internationally and to be perceived as something that is unique and different, and not just one of a half a dozen or more other regional groupings. So I think we need to take that wake-up call seriously. The External Action Service will open its doors, metaphorically speaking, on the 1st of January, and I think it's great that they will have somebody as experienced and professional as David O'Sullivan to be part of the top management there. I think that's something that Ireland can be very proud of, but also for me as one of the people who will be dealing very closely with the External Action Service, it's a very reassuring to know somebody of David's expertise and experience will be there. I hope that the service will start to function very quickly. It is a good idea to bring together the policy instruments the Commission has together with the foreign policy of the Union. It will take time for all of us to learn how to work together, but I think the challenges of making Europe's voice count internationally are such that it will succeed. It will be an experiment that will work. But I think it will only work if Member States are also prepared to agree a union line and then to integrate it as part of their own bilateral relations with our key strategic partners. And up to date, that has not always been the case. You still see, especially some of the larger Member States, wanting to say, yes, the Union, that's fine, but our position is, and don't worry about the European Union, we'll help you fix that. So very important that everybody buys into it with the same degree of enthusiasm and commitment, and that we manage to develop a European Union line on foreign policy issues, which doesn't mean that there can't be national positions, but they should not be in contradiction with the European Union line. So I think that the External Action Service and the fact of having the High Representative as a Vice President of the Commission is an experiment that will work, but it will take time to work because you have to put different cultures together and to make something that's greater than the sum of its parts. I also think that we will have a lot of external pressure to get our act together and to behave more like the European Union. You see several of the big, not to say huge, emerging countries now arguing much more actively for appropriate representation in different international bodies. And one of their first lines always is, there's too many Europeans. So one way for Europe to continue to exert its influence, but not to be too many Europeans, is to mobilise behind European Union positions that we can argue about at home, but that we should defend with many voices saying the same message once we are in international negotiations. So again, I think that this first year has been a year of investment in building something that will deliver for the future, but I think also facing a certain pressure of a need to deliver and to show that Europe is a foreign policy player that is to be counted on and reckoned with. Perhaps also a word about the European Parliament, because what we see is a European Parliament that is much more assertive about its role post-Lisbon. The very early negative vote on SWIFT was a very clear signal from the Parliament to the Council that the Parliament will not just fall into line behind unanimous positions of the Council, and that the Parliament wants to be a co-equal part of the legislation and to be involved right from the very beginning. And it is obvious that the Lisbon Treaty gives a lot more say in the lawmaking of the Union to the Parliament, something that I don't think the Council has yet come to terms with. We are used to a system where the rotating presidency deals with Parliament, which means that the other 26 member states basically don't deal with Parliament. Now that has to change, because a lot of what we're working on will take longer than 6 months to negotiate with Parliament. One example I will give, we're coming up now to the negotiation starting next year of a new multi-annual financial framework for the European Union. That is going to be a multi-presidency task, so the Council needs to engage as an institution with Parliament in a way that it has never done before, and I think it's not yet found the right way to do it. I think that maybe a word also on the impact on the Commission of the changes in the Lisbon Treaty. What I see at the moment is a certain amount of blurring of roles. There's a tendency from all sides to want to blur things. You have a lot of tasking coming from the European Council to the Commission, which has to be worked out in terms of respecting the Commission's right of initiative. But you also have from the Parliament side, in the negotiations of the recent framework agreement, a strong desire of Parliament to share a lot of the work and even micromanage a lot of the work of the Commission. So hopefully these are the settling down period, the transition of having a new treaty, of implementing it. But I think that overall the shape of the new and more got together union is there, but there are still issues to be settled down and bedded down before we can say now we really are at cruising speed in terms of implementing the Lisbon Treaty. I also wanted to say a short word about the international side of things, because we tend to be so introspective in the European Union that we often forget the wider world is out there. And sometimes we forget that the outside world isn't just waiting for us to get our act together. They're actually getting on with the rest of life and the rest of business. And I think we cannot really say that we are more visible or more effective in this first year post-Lisbon. And I think that's a problem. I think the US is in danger of losing interest in the European Union as a partner, unless we can come out of our institutional musings and show that we have a serious agenda where we can engage transatlantically. I think also the emerging countries are less interested in dealing with Europe as a bloc, more interested in dealing with individual member states when it suits them. And this is also something that we have to address. I think Europe has to do some deep soul searching about our approach internationally. It's clear that neither the US nor China are interested in signing up to binding international agreements, which is what we love. We know how to do that. We do it inside the Union, so we like to extend it to the rest of the world. But I think being stuck for so long on Doha and having had a setback in Copenhagen shows us that perhaps that particular model of international agreement making has run its course, at least temporarily. So I think Europe is right to be ambitious in these areas. It's how we drive our own agenda, but we're going to have to take a hard look at whether it is going to be possible in any near future to agree to reach worthwhile agreements that involve the whole world. That is one of the reasons why I think the role of the G20 is something very important to watch. The European Union is an influential player in the G20, and we will have French presidency of both the G20 and the G8 in the next year. So these are opportunities for Europe to put its particular messages across and to argue for shaping the world agenda in the ways that we would like. And again, good preparation at home, having a clear and agreed and coherent EU position that then all 27 can fan out across the world and argue for with their own particular accents. That's going to be very important, I think. I said I would mention a few things that are coming up on the Union agenda in the near future that I think Ireland will want to focus on and that will present some challenges for Ireland. And I want to mention 3 of them in particular. The first one is the next multi-annual financial framework. That is basically the long-term budget for the Union. And, there isn't a worse time for the Union to be asking for a new budget. But that's where we are. This is the time in which we have to do it. And so before next summer, the Commission will put forward a proposal for how we see the future financing of the Union for the next X years. We are going to propose for 10 years, so a very long-term framework. We need a long-term framework to provide a degree of programming for major investments that will have to be done. I think it's going to be a very challenging package to negotiate, not only in terms of what the ultimate size of the budget should be, but also what the purpose of the budget should be. And I think that one of the things Ireland is going to have to decide is where to position itself in the debate. I was very interested to see very clear messages coming from Poland that they are going to go for the investment side of the budget. They're going to want to have strong cohesion policy and to be less concerned about the common agricultural policy. So I think it's going to be very interesting for Ireland to work out its own position, but also to see where are there other member states who might or might not see things from a similar point of view from ours. The Commission recently published what we have called a budget review, and I'm advising people to read it 2 or 3 times because it's actually quite a radical agenda for changing the way that we approach community financing, but it's written in a very low-key style. So I advise those of you who are interested in it to read it a few times, and we'd be very happy to engage in discussion on it. It sets out quite a lot of our thinking that would go into next year's proposals, but it doesn't ever mention the size of the budget or the share of each policy in the budget. What we would actually like to have is a debate about what is the union budget for, what should it be financing, before we come to the inevitable, fairly sordid negotiations over exactly how much money should be in the budget. Second thing I want to mention is the trade agenda. The overwhelming first preference of the union is still to complete the Doha round, but that it's difficult to say when that might be feasible. And with that out of reach for the moment, the union will certainly be pursuing regional and bilateral trade agreements. Now, these, at a time of economic difficulty, the growth potential coming from opening up with other parts of the world is obviously a big source of economic growth in the union and of jobs in the union. But we need to look sector by sector, agreement by agreement, at exactly where the impact falls. We've just signed a very important free trade agreement with Korea, which I think is going to be very beneficial for both the union and for Korea, and has been very well received in most parts of the union, and is considered to be very, very positive from the point of view of the European agricultural sector. But there's a lot of concern in the system over what the ultimate shape of an agreement with the Mercosur countries would be, particularly because of the concerns for the Irish beef industry. So these are things which, in a general scheme, I think will be very beneficial for the European Union, but where inevitably there may be an impact on one or the other sector of the economy. So again, a lot of thinking needs to be done now as to how Ireland should position itself in terms of these various agreements. And the Commission has launched the idea of finding a way to compensate sectors that lose where the overall union wins massively from further free trade agreements. So recognising that not everyone is a winner, but trying to find ways to share the benefits of the overall win with those sectors where inevitably there will be some pressure coming. The final point I wanted to raise is the CCCTB, which is the Common Consolidated Tax Base, and where the Commission has said we will come with a proposal in 2011. Obviously, there is no change in the unanimity rule that all tax matters have to be decided by unanimity, but there will be a proposal coming from the Commission next year, which Ireland again will need to analyse, think about and decide where to position itself. So these are just 3 of the things on the more short-term agenda that I wanted to signal to an audience like yourselves who do look behind the immediate announcements, and where I think it will be interesting to see the analysis that Ireland will do and how Ireland is going to position itself on each of these fairly major policy proposals coming from the Commission. So, as you will have gathered, I could go on for hours, but I'm not sure you could go on listening to me for hours. So I'm going to hold here and say that I'd be very happy to have comments from you, questions, and on topics that I haven't mentioned, as well as topics that I have mentioned. And thank you again for coming this afternoon. It's been a great pleasure talking to you.